I always had a fascination with houses that are old or even creepy, reminiscent of movies, where characters remain awake in a huge mansion with a dark past and creaking floorboards. With my interest in architecture and my occupation as a graduate student in the history of architecture, it has given me the necessary skills to reveal the hidden stories behind the old, deserted buildings. Quite unexpectedly, I got a phone call from the Historical Preservation Society concerning a manor house in the deserted town of Hollow End. My superior spoke, explaining how this opportunity would give me the chance to write my thesis. When I got to Hollow End, I felt a tingle of coldness that surrounded it. Despite being confused by the worried glances of the locals, I reached the house. I soon learned the reasoning behind the glimpses. The house on top of the hill, historically, was known as Blackwood House. All kinds of incidents, including vanishings, strange sounds, and numerous sightings of the ghosts, had been circulating for more than a century regarding this house. However, I was not a superstitious woman to go by folklore stories, which were hard to believe in. One morning, I decided to go up the path, which was covered with moss, up to the floor of Blackwood House. The house was collapsing right in front of me. The once beautiful house, with beautiful white paintings and beautiful green gates, was now in ruins, covered with ivy. The door to the house was old and was made of a solid redwood, and it creaked each time I opened it. Inside, there was an even bigger mess. There were old toys scattered all over the place, and the walls were full of holes made by bullets and knives. The stench was that of a putrefaction and a vague odor, an essentially unmistakable scent that the girl failed to pinpoint. It was that of rust. In the large hall, I arranged my equipment. According to me, the goal was to photograph all the rooms to penetrate through the layers of wallpaper and the dust of the past accumulating on the house. Eventually, I engaged in the work, and eventually got myself fixated on a large and extravagant painting of a lady in the dining room. The subject was a Shirley gentleman, dressed in Victorian costume. In the painting, it was noticeable that someone inflicted a large incision on the painting, as if they wanted to use brute force to separate it. That night, I decided to stay indoors, hoping to start on the next day very early in the morning. But as the clock struck midnight, I sat up abruptly. The light from my flashlight was wobbling. I tried to get up and suddenly was fully aware that there was no sound in the house at all. There was no whispering, no groaning, only the quiet. Shaking the fear as I lay back down, I heard it, a low, quiet voice that I could hardly hear, originating from the dining room. Taking the flashlight, I moved toward the direction from where the sound came from. The whispering became louder and louder, though I could not understand what was being said. As I stepped into the dining room, the ray of the torchlights fell on the portrait. The cut on the material appeared to have spread, and behind it, I could see a fogged face. With my heart racing, I extended my hand to make contact with the painting. As soon as I touched the canvas with my fingers, the whispers ceased immediately. I jumped back immediately, knocking against the table behind me. Taking a deep breath, I noticed something on the floor, a small journal. It was dusty and covered in cobwebs. I placed my fingers on it and read the title of the book, Edward Blackwood. I went back to the parlor and opened the journal. It was crammed full of logs describing Edward Blackwood's crack-up. He wrote that he heard voices that encouraged him to do evil, murderous things. The final entry was dated the night before his disappearance, 13th June, 1930. This fog is finally beginning to clear. I have to strip it off for the real reality to be revealed. They are coming for me. My mind raced. The legend spoke of Edward Blackwood, the last owner of the house, who vanished without a trace. I knew I had to keep reading, even as dread coiled in my stomach. Each page detailed rituals and invocations, all aimed at summoning something from beyond. I realized Edward had been trying to reach another realm, to uncover a dark truth hidden beneath the surface of reality. Then, as if on cue, the flashlight dimmed and went off completely. The parlor went dark all of a sudden. I reached for the spare batteries in my flashlight, but all was in vain. A gust of wind came blowing through the room and put out the matches. The darkness closed around me like a blanket of soundless night. Then the whispering commenced anew, growing louder and more pervasive in its instance. I could now make out the words, "Lift the curtain, become one of us." Simultaneously, I shrieked and let the journal fall from my hands. I ran towards the door, but immediately stopped, for the door slammed shut in front of me. Fear rose as I tried to open it by pulling the handle with some force. The word had spread, and the discussions were growing louder. A chill ran down my spine. In frustration, I returned to the journal, seeking how I could prevent whatever had happened. As I flipped through the pages, a passage caught my eye. The veil binds them. Only the light of truth can free them. I recalled the gleaming light of the gas lantern that I had noticed in the kitchen. Just maybe, I might succeed if I can reach it. I quickly moved towards the kitchen, where the whispers seemed to trail me. I turned towards the lantern and began fiddling with it as if my life depended on it. The instant the flame began to burn, the voices sounded evil, hung heavy in the air, and dissipated slightly. Thus, with the lantern held high up, I had to navigate my way back to the dining room. Such an unpleasant, malevolent face in the portrait tried to avoid the light. I walked up to the painting and took the lantern. The jagged cut in the canvas started to heal, and the monstrous expression started to disappear. I understood that Edward Blackwood was an occultist who tried to conjure something that was out of his control, and it was my turn to excommunicate it. With the journal against the painting, as I recited what was written, the house trembled. They spoke softly, and then they screamed and stopped. Huffing and puffed, I dropped to the floor, while the lantern was still shining its light. The house had a different feel, as if some sort of pressure had been lifted. I understood that the danger was gone, but the price was evident. The curtain had been pulled back, and I had met my shadow. Hollow End appeared rather ordinary in the morning sun. I packed my things and left the journal in the house. Looking back at Blackwood House, I stepped on the accelerator and drove away. They remained secluded and unmoving, burying their mysteries beneath layers of dust once more. However, I knew that I could never forget what I had discovered and the horror that existed just around the corner. Weeks had passed since I fled from Hollow End, but I never managed to forget Blackwood House. The Historical Preservation Society thanked me for the notes and photographs I had taken before the disaster. However, I had saved the best for last. The journal of Edward Blackwood and the malevolent force I had confronted was something I could not share. Having returned to my apartment, I could hardly continue my normal life, as the cold whispers and the twisted faces haunted me at night. I could not escape the feeling that whatever it was that happened to me in that house was with me. It seemed that each one was sentient. Each creak coming from the floorboards beneath me sent a shiver down my spine. One evening, as I was arranging my research papers and notes, I came across an envelope I had never seen before. It was old and yellowish, and it was closed with a sort of black blood-red wax. I could hardly hold my hand steady to break the seal and unroll the piece of vellum within. It was written in a flowing cursive. The ink was dried up, but one could still read the words. To the brave, one who decided to lift the curtain, the future is linked to the past. In an instant, a shiver ran down my spine. I saw my breast condense into the mist. I fumbled the piece of paper and stared at it with wide eyes, my heart racing. The walls of my apartment appeared to be constricting, and the shadows became heavier and more tangible. I rummaged for my cell phone, hoping to get in touch with someone, anyone, but the only sound coming from the phone was a low buzz. Then I heard it again, the whispering. It started softly, almost imperceptibly, but quickly grew louder, echoing the same malevolent chant I had heard in Blackwood House. Peel back the veil. Join us. It whispered, its voice a chilling echo of my nightmares. The figure paused, its grin faltering, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent. The room seemed to warp and twist around me, and I felt myself being pulled towards the darkness. I screamed the incantation, holding the journal out like a shield. The figure recoiled, its form wavering, but it did not disappear. As my voice grew weaker, The figure's grin widened.
The veil is thin.
It hissed.
You cannot escape what lies beneath.
In a final, desperate act, I threw the lantern at the figure. The glass shattered, and the oil ignited, casting a blinding light. The figure shrieked, retreating into the shadows. The room returned to normal, the whispers fading into silence. As I take a deep breath, in a blink, the whole scenario changes when I see myself extend my hands towards a young man from the 90s, asking him to join the veil.